There was a scream, a splash, and then a weird buzzing sound that ended with a loud pop. I didn't even have to check. I knew exactly what had happened. Karen's precious surveillance drone had just nosedived into her pool like a mechanical kamikaze, and all because I decided I'd had enough of being watched in my own backyard. Rewind 3 weeks, and this whole mess began with a bratwurst, a cold soda, and an innocent barbecue that apparently violated Karen's ever-evolving definition of peace and order. It was a Saturday afternoon, sunny and calm, the kind of day that begged for burgers, lawn chairs, and a little music. My wife Angela had just finished prepping the sides while I was manning the grill, flipping burgers like a backyard Gordon Ramsay. Our teenage daughter, Ellie, had her earbuds in and was curled up with a book on the patio swing, enjoying the calm before school chaos kicked back in. Then came the sound that would trigger this entire battle, a high-pitched, constant whirring growing louder and closer. I looked up and there it was, a shiny, black quadcopter drone hovering maybe 20 feet above our yard, camera tilted down like it was filming an action movie, starring us. I stared at it, spatula still in hand, wondering for a split second if it was just some neighborhood kid's toy. Then it drifted closer, just inches above our fence line, and the camera zoomed in. Not on the grill. Not even on me. Right on Ellie, who had no idea she was being filmed. That was when my protective instincts kicked in. I waved at it, tried yelling. Nothing. The drone twitched a little and floated off toward the oak tree near the property line. I followed it to see where it would land and caught sight of it zipping back toward the biggest 2-story house on the block, Karen's place. Now, in most neighborhoods, there's that one person. In ours, it was Karen. She ran the HOA with the same energy a prison warden runs, solitary confinement. Grass half an inch too high. Citation. Flag on your porch the wrong color? Fine. Host a birthday party with more than 5 balloons? Emergency meeting. She didn't just enjoy control, she inhaled it. And apparently, she'd just graduated to airspace enforcement. That evening, I walked over and knocked on her door. She answered with her usual plastic smile, and an oversized wine glass that could have doubled as a fishbowl. Her perfectly straightened hair didn't move in the breeze, and neither did her expression when I said, "Hey, I think your drone flew over our yard this afternoon." "I know," she said, not even pretending to deny it. "Just a quick flyover. I was doing a routine neighborhood safety check. Someone's been leaving their trash bins out a little too long. Could be a sanitation issue." "Right," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "Except your drone hovered over my daughter. That's not a safety check. That's surveillance." She took a sip from her glass and tilted her head. "If you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't mind being watched. Besides, it's legal. It's not like I landed it in your yard." Then she shut the door. I walked back home fuming. Angela could tell the second she saw my face. "She really said that?" I nodded, and Ellie looked up from the couch, clearly unsettled. "That drone was super close to my window earlier," she said. "It's not okay." By Monday morning, we had our first citation in weeks. Improper grill cover. Non-compliant material. It was canvas. From Home Depot. I almost laughed, but I knew it was just the start. Over the next few days, more tickets arrived like clockwork. Garden tools visible from street view. Unregistered decorative rock. Unauthorized windchime. I kid you not, we got a warning for a windchime. And every time we stepped outside, we could hear the buzz. Always nearby. Always watching. Angela stopped hanging laundry on the line. Ellie started pulling her curtains tight every night. The neighbors' kids wouldn't even play in the sprinkler anymore because they didn't want to be on camera. We weren't just being harassed. We were being monitored like we were under house arrest. I started researching. It didn't take long to identify Karen's drone model. It was a high-end surveillance quad with programmable routes, real-time video, and an impressive range. That wasn't a hobbyist drone. It was made for recon. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just trying to enforce the rules. She was building a miniature surveillance state, with herself as queen, jury, and air traffic control. What she didn't know, what no one around here knew, is that I spent 6 years designing counter-surveillance tech for government contractors. I wasn't just familiar with how drones work. I'd helped create software to jam them, redirect them, and even brick them mid-air when necessary. I'd walked away from that world to have a quieter life, and now it felt like all those skills were about to be used in a war against HOA tyranny. That night, I dusted off my old kit in the garage. It was like meeting an old friend: signal scanners, frequency readers, directional jammers. Karen wanted a war of tech? Fine. I'd give her one. But I wasn't going to do anything illegal. Just inconvenient. Immensely inconvenient. The next morning, the drone came back. I sat under the patio umbrella with a smoothie and a laptop while it floated above me. I activated a low-power pulse jammer. The drone shuddered slightly, dipped down a foot, then corrected itself. Karen must have been confused. I turned the signal off and sipped my smoothie like nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, a neighborhood-wide email from Karen pinged my inbox. Attention all residents. There may be foreign interference in our neighborhood's security systems. Be vigilant. Report suspicious tech behavior. It was laughable. She was paranoid, and it was only going to get worse. Angela asked me if I was going to report her. I told her no. Reporting her would go through the same HOA channels she ran. The only way to win this was to fight fire with finesse, and maybe a little static. Karen had forgotten that every queen who builds a throne also paints a target on her back. She'd invaded my privacy, crossed a line, and now she was going to learn what happened when you pushed a quiet neighbor with the wrong background. The drone would fly again tomorrow. I'd be ready. And this time, it wasn't coming back in one piece. I spent the next 2 nights mapping the drone's patterns like a storm tracker. It flew on a schedule that was almost too perfect. Every morning around 9 a.m., just after the kids left for school, and again around 3:30 p.m., right before people got home from work. It circled our cul-de-sac in slow, deliberate loops, dipping lower near certain homes and briefly hovering around the usual offenders: people with overgrown hedges, slightly tilted mailboxes, or heaven forbid, a lawn gnome. But my house got special treatment. The drone lingered longer over our deck and windows, sometimes even circling twice. Karen wasn't just collecting evidence for the HOA. She was nursing a personal grudge. I took careful notes, even charted its flight altitude using an old visual rangefinder I used back when I did signal diagnostic. From that, I determined the drone was flying between 30 and 40 feet up, well below FAA minimums. Technically legal, depending on state rules, but definitely shady when done without consent. Not to mention she was using it like an airborne tattletale. That made her obsession all the more dangerous. What really raised my eyebrow was that she never let the drone fly too far from her property. It always stayed within 3 houses of her front door, like she needed it close to home in case it failed. That told me something else. She was piloting it manually, probably from her upstairs living room. A few drone models could be programmed, but this one responded to movement too quickly for pre-coded paths. That gave me a clear edge. If she was controlling it in real time, I could disrupt her signal right when she was mid-command. Not enough to crash it, yet, but just enough to let her know someone else was in the game now. The first field test had gone perfectly. The drone had stuttered, dipped, and then self-corrected. Karen must have noticed, but she probably chalked it up to a weak connection or wind interference. I waited 2 days before my next test, knowing she'd be watching more closely. Sure enough, her paranoia escalated. She emailed the entire HOA warning us about potential digital invaders, as if Russian hackers had set their sights on our cul-de-sac. Then she installed 2 new cameras on her porch and one on a tall pole in her backyard, motion-sensitive with infrared. She was preparing for war with a ghost. But I wasn't the only one who had noticed something strange. My next-door neighbor, Tom, came over while I was fixing my gutter. He's the type who minds his business, but even he was rattled. He leaned in and said, "Hey, you ever see that thing fly over your grill? I think Karen's drone caught me shirtless last week. I've been getting complaints about unruly appearances." I nodded, keeping things vague, but his expression told me I wasn't alone. The neighborhood was starting to feel like a fishbowl with one person doing all the watching. I kicked the next phase into gear. I built a directional jammer disguised as a decorative birdhouse and placed it on my patio railing. It looked harmless, a wooden robin perched on the edge, staring into the void. Inside, it had a modified frequency disruptor that could scramble signals in a 50-foot cone. Still legal under most state laws, as long as it didn't cause interference to emergency bands or commercial services. I'd tested it at half power already. Now it was time to dial it up. The next morning, Karen's drone arrived right on schedule. I sipped my coffee as it floated into range. I flicked the switch. It jerked in midair like it hit an invisible wall, spun left too fast, then wobbled. I turned the jammer off after 5 seconds. The drone steadied, hovered, and zipped back to her house like it was scared. That was enough to throw her off. I imagined her staring at her monitor, tapping her controller like it was broken. Then came the HOA-wide email blast titled "Strange Interference Event." She claimed someone was attempting to sabotage community safety. She even attached blurry screenshots of what she described as interrupted footage, which was basically grainy video of my birdhouse and my grill. No proof, no face, just desperation. She was spiraling, and I knew it wouldn't take much more to tip her into full meltdown. By that weekend, Karen had gone full spy thriller. She hired a private security firm, probably out of some neighborhood enhancement fund, to install a portable antenna on her roof. I spotted the van and snapped a few pictures. When I asked the installer what it was, he muttered something about signal repeaters and connectivity boosts. In other words, Karen was trying to amplify her drone's range so she could maintain control if it went too far. She was adapting. But so was I. That night, Angela and I sat on the porch watching the stars, and I showed her the jam logs from my laptop. She raised an eyebrow. "You're treating this like a mission." I nodded. "That's because it is one." She turned this into a privacy battleground. We're not just her neighbors, we're her targets. Angela paused and said, "Just be careful. She's crazy, but crazy people get dangerous when they feel powerless." The next day proved her right. The drone showed up again, but this time it had a new trick. It carried a tiny speaker attached to its underside, and as it hovered near our porch, it emitted a loud, garbled voice. "This is private property. Please comply with HOA regulations." It was Karen's voice, pre-recorded, amplified. The audacity of that woman. Ellie came running out of the house in disbelief. Is she sending audio messages now? What is this, a flying Karen? I couldn't help but laugh, even as my jaw clenched. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't going to stop. The drone was no longer about rules. It was personal now, some deranged power game she needed to win. I wasn't dealing with a bored retiree. I was up against a woman who had tasted power and would do anything to keep it, including violating every boundary of decency and privacy. I decided the next test would be the last. I upgraded the jammer with a signal spoofer, one that could intercept the drone's commands and replace them. Instead of simply disrupting the signal, it would trick the drone into thinking it was somewhere else, leading it into a loop it couldn't escape. That would push it to emergency return mode, or better yet, to a place it couldn't recover from. I scouted locations with water, gutters, puddles, even that annoying koi pond she bragged about at every HOA meeting. But one location stood out for its irony and visibility: her own pool. Front yard privacy violation? Meet backyard poetic justice. I adjusted the settings, aligned the birdhouse transmitter, and prepared the route. Now all I needed was the next visit, and Karen's pride to fly one step too far. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and by some ironic twist of fate, It just so happened to fall on the same day Karen's drone performed one of its longest and most invasive patrols yet. I had been counting the minutes all day. This meeting would be my staging ground. Not for a confrontation, but for a well-timed performance that would set everything else in motion. Karen thought she was the master of public manipulation. She didn't realize she'd walked into a chess game with someone who knew how to think 12 moves ahead. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to end her reign, and I had a USB stick in my pocket that could turn the entire room against her. The meeting took place at the local rec center, the same place we had our neighborhood holiday parties. Except this time, the atmosphere wasn't festive. Karen strutted in like she was hosting a TED Talk, dressed in what I can only describe as business casual villainous, overly stiff blazer, tablet in hand, and that ever-present smug smile. She barely acknowledged anyone as she took her usual spot at the head of the table. The board members looked uneasy. The drone complaints had started circulating beyond just whispers. People were getting uncomfortable. She knew it too, but she was still playing offense. "Let's begin," Karen said with a clap, as if she was opening a Broadway show. Item 1. Potential signal interference disrupting our community's aerial safety device. Yes, she really called it an aerial safety device. Before we discuss that, I said, standing up casually from the second row, I have something I think the board, and everyone here, should see. She raised an eyebrow. Mr. Nash, unless you've submitted a motion to be added to the agenda. I didn't, I said, plugging the USB into the projector setup. But what I have is about neighborhood safety, which I believe you're quite passionate about. She looked annoyed but curious. The lights dimmed, and a series of clips began to play. Each one had been collected from different neighbors over the past 2 weeks. Footage of the drone hovering over their yards, peeking into second-story windows, flying low enough to scare pets, and in one case, filming a family during a backyard birthday party. One neighbor audibly said, "What the hell is that thing doing near my kid?" Another clip showed the drone briefly hovering over a trampoline where 3 children were playing. The room went silent. I ended the presentation with the footage I had recorded, Karen sitting in her living room, remote in hand, as her drone hovered outside my daughter's bedroom. The timestamp and GPS data were clearly visible in the corner. It was, without a doubt, the smoking gun. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. One board member, Marcy, leaned forward and said, "Karen, is that your living room?" Karen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes tightened. "Those videos are taken out of context. I was merely surveying the area for safety issues. That's within the HOA's jurisdiction." "Since when does the HOA have airspace jurisdiction?" Tom, my neighbor, called out from the back. Another neighbor, Brenda, added, "You flew over my hot tub at night. Are you going to tell me that's part of a safety protocol?" Karen's voice went shrill. "Look, the drone is a tool. It's not my fault if people feel uncomfortable. Maybe they should consider what they're doing to attract attention." Gasps broke out. Even her usual allies on the board looked disturbed. She had crossed the line from control freak to full-blown creep. For a few long seconds, no one said anything. Then the board president, an older gentleman named Howard who usually avoided conflict like the plague, cleared his throat. "Karen, based on what we've seen, I think we need to have a private board discussion about the scope of your authority, and whether it's been exceeded." Karen stood up so fast her chair toppled over. "This is a setup. You people are being manipulated by someone with technical skills and a personal vendetta." I shrugged. "Or maybe we're just tired of being spied on while we're watering plants or grilling dinner." She stormed out of the meeting without another word. No goodbye. No defense. Just silence, the click of her heels, and the squeak of the door closing behind her. That should have been the end. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't built that jammer and spent all those hours mapping her drone's behavior just for a public shaming. I needed her to feel what it was like to have her own space violated, her own bubble burst by an unwanted presence. And I had the perfect plan. The following evening was unusually hot. Karen had turned on her pool lights, and from the shadows near my yard, I could see her relaxing on a flamingo float with a drink in hand. Her drone was buzzing in a slow arc just above the fence line, performing what I assumed was another routine check. I had my laptop open and the jammer active. I watched the telemetry data stream in. Her drone, now outfitted with that tiny speaker, was broadcasting distorted snippets of her voice again, only this time she was slurring her words slightly. Maybe the wine was stronger than she thought. I activated the spoofer. The drone twitched, turned, and instead of maintaining its usual pattern, it slowly began drifting toward her backyard. I adjusted the frequency injection, mimicking her manual commands, nudging the drone ever closer to her pool. Karen didn't notice at first. She was on her phone, floating under the backyard lights, humming to herself. Then she heard it, the soft hum growing louder directly above her. She looked up, eyes wide. "What the no, back up!" she shouted, standing up on the float. The drone began to spiral, wobbling like it was drunk. I gave it one final command, descend. It dropped straight into the center of her pool with a satisfying splash, sending waves across the water and soaking her from the knees down. She screamed, flailed, and tried to grab the float, slipping off into the shallow end. The drone's red light blinked twice and then died. I closed my laptop and smiled. The next morning, Karen didn't make her usual HOA rounds. No emails. No citations. No surveillance. Just silence. Word spread fast. People whispered about how the drone malfunctioned and took a dive. Some said it was divine justice. Others said maybe it had become self-aware and tried to escape. But no one missed it. The buzzing was gone. The air felt lighter. And as for me, I finally spent a morning on my porch without having to glance up at the sky. The aftermath of the drone crash was far more dramatic than even I had expected. Karen didn't come outside for 3 straight days. Not a single email. Not a single HOA bulletin. For someone who usually treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom, the silence was suspicious, almost eerie. People began to wonder if she'd finally given up. But Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat so easily. She was the kind who quietly brewed her anger, like a kettle building pressure. And on the 4th day, she exploded. The first sign of her reappearance was a flurry of complaints that showed up in everyone's inbox around dawn. She accused several residents of drone sabotage, a crime that apparently didn't exist, and labeled it a calculated attack against community safety and personal property. She demanded immediate board action, citing intentional airspace interference and digital terrorism. Her language was so absurdly dramatic it felt like we were suddenly living in a spy thriller. I half expected her next email to accuse someone of espionage or cyber warfare. Her tone was frantic, and it was clear she was spiraling. The drone had been expensive, top-tier tech with built-in GPS, multi-angle cameras, and a high-range controller. Her pride and joy had died a watery death in her own backyard, and despite her efforts to spin the story, everyone already knew what happened. Still, she tried to regain control. She marched to every board member's house with printed packets, filled with evidence she claimed linked someone in the neighborhood to the crash. But none of it was real. It was vague technical jargon she'd pulled from Google, completely misunderstanding how signal interference even worked. The board didn't buy it. Marcy, the treasurer, openly laughed during one of her rants and told her, "Karen, you can't just accuse people because your toy took a swim." That only fueled Karen's paranoia. She even called the police, insisting her drone had been illegally downed. The responding officer apparently had a hard time keeping a straight face when she tried to describe how enemy frequencies had corrupted her control systems. The best part? The drone's memory card had been completely fried from water damage. Whatever footage she'd hoped to use as evidence was gone. All that remained was a charred circuit board and a soaking wet shell. By now, the neighborhood was watching with a mix of amusement and concern. Karen wasn't just angry, She was unraveling. A few residents suggested she take a break from HOA duties, maybe even go on vacation. But Karen wasn't built for retreat. Instead, she went on the offensive again. This time, she printed flyers and taped them to mailboxes and lampposts. The flyers featured blurry screenshots of her crashed drone, overlaid with the words, "Sabotage is a crime," in red font, followed by a quote from some obscure HOA clause about community security. It would have been funny if it wasn't so surreal. But the real tipping point came later that week during an emergency HOA meeting she demanded. She called it to address the ongoing campaign of hostility she believed was being coordinated against her. The meeting was held outdoors, near the community clubhouse, and this time nearly the entire neighborhood showed up. People brought lawn chairs and popcorn like it was movie night. Karen stood behind a folding table, dramatically flanked by laminated printouts, one of which showed a zoomed-in photo of my patio birdhouse. "This," she declared, pointing at it like she'd found the murder weapon, "is not a decoration. It is a signal disruptor. I believe this was used to target and down my property." I didn't even blink. "That's a birdhouse," I said plainly. "Unless you think the robins have formed a resistance movement." Snickers echoed across the crowd. Karen's face flushed, but she pressed on, trying to convince everyone that someone, maybe me, maybe others, was leading a secret operation to undermine her authority. Her wild accusations only backfired. People were tired. Tired of the spying, tired of the pettiness, tired of the control. And now that the drone was gone, they realized just how suffocating things had become. Then, as if fate had perfect comedic timing, Brenda from 2 streets over raised her hand and asked, "Karen, are you the one who flew the drone over my bathroom window last month?" Karen froze. Brenda added, "Because I thought I was imagining things, but now I'm pretty sure that was your drone. I was literally brushing my teeth and it was right there." We made eye contact. Laughter erupted. Not because it was funny in itself, but because it was absurd. The idea that Karen had become so obsessed with her HOA crusade that she'd accidentally spied on people in their pajamas was beyond ridiculous. It was appalling, embarrassing, and exactly the moment the room turned against her. Howard, the board president, stood up and cleared his throat. "Karen, it's time we addressed the issue of authority abuse. You were never authorized to conduct aerial surveillance of any kind. There are privacy laws, and what you did crossed the line." She tried to argue, but her words didn't carry anymore. Her power had evaporated. The board voted, right then and there, to suspend her HOA privileges pending an ethics review. She was stripped of her enforcement authority. Her access to the neighborhood newsletter was revoked. She was, for the first time in years, just another resident. The next morning, the HOA email came from Howard's account, not Karen's. It contained a simple announcement. Effective immediately, all aerial surveillance over private property is banned within the HOA jurisdiction. Residents are entitled to privacy, and no one may use drones for monitoring or enforcement purposes. A formal bylaw revision is in process. It was followed by a parenthetical nickname, also known as the Karen Clause. The whole neighborhood had a field day with that. People started making jokes. Someone put a tiny plastic drone in the community garden with a cardboard sign that said, "Rest in pieces." Another neighbor changed their Wi-Fi network name to Enemy Frequency. Even Tom made a mock HOA badge with a picture of a birdhouse on it and wore it around during his morning walk. As for Karen, she disappeared from view. Her blinds stayed closed. Her porch lights were off. She didn't show up at community events, didn't respond to emails, and for the first time ever, didn't complain about the recycling bins being left out too early. Whether it was embarrassment or pure rage, no one knew for sure. But the important part was that she was gone in every way that mattered. It wasn't just the drone that crashed. It was the illusion of control she had built over the years. Her grip on the neighborhood had finally slipped, not because someone yelled or fought, but because she exposed her own obsession. All I had to do was guide her toward her own self-destruction and let gravity handle the rest. And in the quiet that followed, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. There were no more flying cameras, no more voice recordings, no more citations for wind chimes or gnomes. People were planting flowers again, chatting on porches, letting their kids run around barefoot. The air felt normal, the way it should have been all along. Life returned to the neighborhood in the most beautiful and unexpected way. It wasn't just about the drone being gone or Karen losing her grip on the HOA board. It was about people finally feeling like they could breathe again. That persistent tension, the subtle fear that any misstep would result in a citation or a complaint, it all evaporated. Kids played basketball in driveways without worrying about noise complaints. Someone painted their fence teal, and nobody cared. Tom even started hosting impromptu backyard barbecues, the kind where you could hear the laughter 3 houses down. The silence Karen left behind was quickly replaced with something far better: joy. A few weeks after Karen's downfall, the HOA board held a special community event to celebrate what they called Neighborhood Unity Day. It was partly an attempt to rebuild trust, and partly an excuse for a big cookout, but either way, everyone showed up. Families brought homemade dishes, the kids ran around with water guns, and the atmosphere was relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. I set up a cornhole game with Ellie and Angela, and for the first time in a long while, we weren't glancing up every few minutes to see if a buzzing drone was watching. About halfway through the event, Howard, the board president, got on the microphone and cleared his throat. "Before we wrap things up," he said, "we'd like to recognize someone for their creative contributions to peace and privacy in our neighborhood." He held up a small, shiny trophy shaped like a tiny drone with exaggerated cartoon eyes and bent propellers. The base read, "For outstanding service in aerial pest control, Max Nash." The crowd erupted in laughter and cheers. I stood there dumbfounded as Angela nudged me to go up. I walked to the front, took the trophy, and gave a mock salute that made everyone laugh harder. Someone from the crowd yelled, "Don't let him near your sprinklers. He'll reprogram them into laser turrets." It was all in good fun. The award wasn't about the trophy. It was about the message: we see what you did and we're grateful. Not just for jamming a drone, but for standing up to the nonsense when no one else could. Even Karen's husband, Greg, gave me a polite nod from across the park. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the last few weeks. Rumor had it he'd been the one urging her to give up the drone obsession long before it all exploded. Now he mostly kept to himself, walking their dog alone and never saying much. If there was any relief for him in Karen losing power, he didn't show it, but he didn't fight it either. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with Angela, watching the sun dip behind the rooftop. Ellie was inside video calling her friends, probably gossiping about Neighborhood Unity Day and the drone trophy. Angela leaned back and sighed. "It's crazy, isn't it? All of this started with a barbecue." I smiled. "And a very nosy drone." She looked at me, amused. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" I thought about that for a moment. No. I think Karen needed to be shown that privacy still matters. That control has limit. And besides, it was worth it just to see her drone do a perfect belly flop into her own pool. Angela laughed so hard she nearly spilled her lemonade. "You really planned that down to the splash, didn't you?" "Every inch of it," I said proudly. The next morning, I took a small project out of the garage. I'd been working on a new drone, not one for spying, but for fun. It was built from scratch, using parts from a kit Ellie and I had started months ago but never finished. This one didn't have cameras or speakers. It wasn't meant to record or patrol. It was designed to deliver snacks. Yes, snacks. A little basket underneath carried anything from a bottle of water to a bag of chips. It was Ellie's idea, a drone that brought her cookies while she did homework in the backyard. I fired it up and let it hover gently over the lawn. Ellie ran outside, squealing with delight as it flew a slow circle and dropped a granola bar near her. She clapped and gave me a thumbs up. I couldn't help but feel a weird sense of pride. Where Karen had used tech to dominate, I was using it to entertain and connect. It wasn't the technology that was the problem, it was the person behind the controls. Tom stopped by around noon, holding a package and grinning. "Hey Max, you got a minute?" He handed me a small wooden plaque. It had a laser-engraved image of a birdhouse and the words, "For tactical bravery in the face of HOA tyranny." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. "You made this?" I asked. "Made it, varnished it, and even debated adding blinking LEDs," he said proudly. "But I figured subtlety works better." By then, the Karen stories had taken on a life of their own. New residents asked about the drone saga, like it was a local legend. Someone even suggested we turn it into a Halloween theme, kids dressing up as drones, birdhouses, and angry HOA managers. Karen herself had faded almost completely into the background. She still lived here, technically, but she didn't interact with anyone anymore. Her windows stayed closed, her yard unkempt, and her mailbox stuffed with junk mail she never picked up. It was like the neighborhood moved on without her. The HOA board eventually passed a full revision of their bylaws. No surveillance equipment was allowed without full community consent. Any citations had to be backed by human observation, not aerial footage. And drones? Banned. Period. No exceptions. The rule was affectionately known as the Karen Clause, and though some newer residents didn't know the backstory, the rest of us always chuckled when we heard it mentioned. As for me, I finally got back to enjoying the little things. Mowing the lawn without a camera buzzing above. Drinking coffee on the porch without wondering if I'd be cited for unlicensed plant placement. And most importantly, feeling like my home was actually mine again. One evening, just before bed, I noticed Karen standing in her driveway, staring up at the sky. She looked older, tired, like someone who had poured all their energy into controlling others only to find themselves completely alone. For a moment I considered waving. But she turned and went inside before I could. Angela joined me a few minutes later and asked, "You ever think she'll try again?" I shook my head. She had her shot. She built a throne out of paranoia and turned herself into a punchline. If she tries anything again, the whole neighborhood will be ready. Angela nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. Good. Because I like the peace. And so did I.